You are listening to Exploring Sacred with your host, Denise Iwana Francisco, on the Temple Within Radio and Digital Media Network, giving voice to the sacred.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Sacred. Welcome to a beautiful brand new day. And welcome into the chat room for those of you that would like to join me in the chat room here at Spreaker. It's a beautiful morning, and I'm happy to be back on the airwaves with everybody. I'm going to go ahead and post the link to the show there in Facebook on the Exploring Sacred page. This morning we're going to talk about sacred or secret. Is something secret just because it is sacred or considered sacred? And not everything that is considered sacred to one person necessarily is considered sacred to another person. So we're going to talk about that this morning. You are welcome to join me in the chat room so that we can have a great discussion about it. All right. Just putting this in the Exploring Sacred page. Thank you to everyone who subscribes to my Spreaker channel. I greatly appreciate it. Very muchly. All right. Hey, Janet Smith. How are you over there in the beautiful UK? Todd and I are headed to Ireland in a couple more months. We're excited about that. Going to explore some ancient Irish shamanism with Amantha Murphy and go to some sacred sites, talk about some sacred things. Sometimes things are considered sacred and held in a sacred space, and sometimes sacred is considered something to be kept secret. Janet, as long as it's you and I just kind of chit-chatting back and forth this morning, for you, what is it that makes something sacred something that should be held in secret? I'm curious. Many people have thoughts about what to share with regard to sacred things and what not to share. And I believe that different people, different societies, communities, organizations have a different bar, a different standard for what should be kept secret from others, what should be kept secret from those who have not yet been initiated. Good morning, Rob. What's the difference? I think that it's something that each and every one of us has to discern for ourselves. I don't think that there is one particular way of looking at something as so sacred that it should be kept secret. I believe that for myself, the definition of sacred is something for me personally that is held in high regard and high esteem, something that nourishes my soul, something that I've learned to the benefit of my soul or the understanding of my soul's journey, or the workings of the universe, of the cosmos, of the magic of the universe, if you will. Those things to me are sacred. I hold them in high regard. I hold relationships, particularly very personal relationships, as sacred. And I hold them very closely in high esteem, and I'm very careful with them. I'm very careful with them. Yeah, exactly, Janet. Do you mean from a spirituality point of view? Yeah. Good morning, Katie Battle. Well, it's nice to have you in the chat room this morning. Janet and I are just discussing what it is that we hold sacred from a spirituality point of view, and what it is that we hold so sacred that we consider it something that we just keep to ourselves, or that we keep secret, or within the confines of a community agreement or an organizational agreement or a circle. For me, if I hold something so dear and I treasure it so dearly, a teaching or an experience of mine. Sometimes our relationships are sacred. Sometimes our alone time is sacred. That's a good one, Janet. our own sacred space. We call something a sacred space. Taking care of ourselves should be considered something that we do, and perhaps even sacred. If we hold our personal time, our personal relationships, our personal experiences as sacred, we're not necessarily going to share all of those experiences on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, but we may share certain portions of our sacred space or our sacred relationships or our sacred alone time. Some of those things that maybe we don't hold quite that dear to us or near to us. We may share those publicly, but oftentimes we hold some things back. There are people, of course, out there who just share it all, right? They share every single thing, and they feel as though their life is an open book. And I have friends that are like this. So they share everything because their life is an open book and they have nothing to hide, and they enjoy having their life out there. And that's perfectly fine too. Some of us, however, I am not one of those I do share a lot of things, but there are certain relationships, etc., that I don't share publicly, and I keep close to the vest or close to my heart. One of the things that people have asked me over the years, Dana, why don't you ever show photos of your Sweat Lodge altar? Why don't you show photos of that? Why don't you allow people to take photographs of your Sweat Lodge altar? And the answer to that is because in the tradition in which I was trained by the teacher who trained me, that altar, also known as a hochoka, is so sacred that we don't take photographs of it, and we would never think to share it on social media. Now, there have been times over the past many years where somebody has taken a photo, and I've been unaware that they have then posted it on Facebook or back in the day, MySpace, remember that? And I politely asked them to please take that down, and explained that that piece of my Sweat Lodge, my ceremonial grounds, is held so sacred that it isn't something that we just share with everybody. And that's following the teachings of my teacher. And why is that? Well, sometimes I believe, and I've been taught by my teachers, and I have many teachers, that as much as we like to think sometimes that everyone in the universe has great intentions, especially those of us who walk a spiritual path, we like to think that everybody is walking that path with integrity, that everybody is walking that path with good intentions for everyone that they encounter, everyone that they have relationship with in a classroom setting, or etc., etc. And that is simply not true. It is simply not true, unfortunately. It is the belief that sometimes we can share something that is sacred, and in sharing it without discernment, the information may end up in the wrong hands, or with somebody whose intentions are not pure or good, or for the benefit of all. Right? I like that creed. Do what you will, but harm none, from our Wiccan brothers and sisters. I think that's a pretty good way to look at it. Harming people. There are certain aspects of spirituality that other people are not ready for. I was just talking about that yesterday in my online class that I teach, the Seer series. Not everybody is prepared for what we hold sacred. For instance, not everybody may be prepared for coming into the Sweat Lodge and the prayers that go on in Sweat Lodge, etc. But going back to the photo and why it's held so sacred, we all know that energy can be directed in any direction. Good morning, Cousin Corey. It's good to see you in the house. Energy can be directed in any way, shape, or form, or direction. We know that as healing practitioners, energy practitioners, spiritual people. And sadly, there are those people who may take a look at as I've been taught, at a photo of my hochoka or my altar down by my sweat lodge and direct negative or malfeasant energy toward my altar, toward my hochoka. And so that is the reason that photos aren't posted. It's also the reason that publicly I don't say, hey, everybody, on Facebook, I'm pouring a sweat lodge on Saturday night. That's something that I actually had to learn. That was addressed to me by one of my older sisters, Della. You know how we learn things. She said to me, Mitankala, you shouldn't be putting out there in public places that you're going to be pouring a sweat lodge. That's a sacred ceremony. And so rather than putting it out there in public, people will either call you and ask you when you are going to hold your next sweat lodge, or you will get in touch with them because they've asked you to let you know, or to let them know that you're pouring a sweat lodge, so that your inipi is held so sacred that you don't put, hey, I'm doing a sweat lodge on Saturday night out for everybody to read, and you don't publish photos of the altar, the buffalo skull, etc. I will at times, put a photo up there of the bones of the inipi in order to help teach people about the sweat lodge, because sometimes when we hold things so tightly and so secretly, there's not an opportunity to share, to learn, if everything is held so tightly. And oftentimes I believe that things are held secret for a certain amount of time, and we as humanity or as a people grow beyond the need to hold something so secret. Years ago when I wrote the book, A Year of Mystic Angels, and David Fix and I published the Empowerment Deck cards, as many of you know, I met up with a rabbi on a flight that I was taking, and I was going over the last edification of my book. So it was a print copy of my book that was there for me to have one last look over before it went into publication. And so I was on the airplane utilizing those spare moments while I was traveling to do a final edit of the manuscript. And the rabbi sitting next to me, he was on his way from Portland, Oregon to Michigan State University in East Lansing. And apparently he was reading my book as I was editing it, and he asked me the question, why are you putting forth information like this? And I said, excuse me, what are you talking about? And he said, I'm admittedly being nosy. I'm intrigued by what it is that you've written and why it is that you feel that it's appropriate to put out information about the angels to this degree, the mysticism of the angels. And he said, and where did you get the information? I said, well, actually, the information came from a series of places, but most recently it was a trip to Egypt, my last trip to Egypt. And he said, well, I was just in Egypt. He said, in fact, I went to this place where there's a synagogue, a Coptic church, and a Muslim mosque all in one space. And I said, well, that's exactly where I was, right there along the Nile River, where they say Moses was taken off of the river. Moses, whose name means the enlightened mind. So the enlightened mind, in that space, there is a synagogue, a mosque, and a Christian church, all doing very well together, by the way, cooperating and getting along. He looked at me and he said, you've been there? I said, yes, I've been there twice. I've done my research. He said, well, I was doing research for Cambridge University in that same space. And I don't feel that people are ready for what it is that you're publishing. And I looked at him and I said, well, Rabbi, you and I will just have to agree to disagree. And he looked at me and he said, well, I suppose we will. Well, the disagreement came about the fact that, when we are empowered, when we understand the workings of the seen and the unseen world around us, that is empowerment. To know that angels are real, that we call them by a name, and the name in and of itself is sacred. Our name is sacred, and this is why we don't take another person's name, or as they say, the Lord's name in vain. Our names are sacred. because there are esoteric energies that are attached to our names. Every name has a meaning. I love that in this modern day, people name their children Elizabeth and that's what they're called. Or they name their child Richard and that's what they're called. They're not necessarily any longer given a nickname, or they are given a nickname, and a lot of kids want to be called by their full name. Well, there's a different energy to a nickname than there is to your full name, which is why recently I changed my name. I've legally changed my name. I understand that my name is sacred. And so for those of you that are wondering why the name is changing on Facebook and Twitter and all of these things, Denise Lynn with an E at the end, King Francisco. Those names are sacred, and the cumulative total of those names is sacred. For those of you out there that are numerologists, you understand exactly what I'm saying. Long time ago, the Hebrew mystics, the ancient Hebrew mystics, taught that every letter of the alphabet is an angelic thought form. Every letter of the alphabet is an angelic thought form. So when we form words, when we speak words, when we write words, some call it spelling, right? To the Hebrew masters, there was an understanding that the spoken word and the way in which we speak it and the tone with which we speak it creates an alchemical reaction in the universe, around us, within one another, within every living thing. It's sacred. Our speech is sacred. We don't hold it secret. But when we hold it in esteem, we understand that the way that we text somebody, that we speak to someone, the tone, it all matters. It all matters. Janet is saying, I hate it when people assume what I'm ready for, especially when they are a stranger. Absolutely. Good morning, Angie. It's good to see you in the house. Corey's saying, I love this topic. I do too. How do we discern what's sacred and what's to be kept secret? Well, at the end of my conversation with the good rabbi, he really was a very nice man. We agreed to disagree, and I said to him, sadly, so much information has been held from people for so long that there are millions upon millions of people who are spiritually impoverished. Spiritually impoverished. Because the information was kept from them. As we know, oral tradition was the way in which we learned for a very long time before Gutenberg came around. Not everybody had access to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not everybody had access to the library at Alexandria. I've been there as well, there in Egypt. Not everybody had access to the written word, and not everybody was taught to read. Good morning, Del Marie. Hane wash day. You got home. You're finally home. And he looked at me and he said, I think I'm going to have to think about that for a moment. If we continue to withhold and hold information, spiritual information, for those few, by whatever bar or standard we set, you see what I'm saying? And when we got off of the airplane, I wished him well in his lecture at Michigan State University. And he wished me well on the sale of my books and cards. And I said, my cards are a teaching tool, all of them, all 4 sets of them. They're teaching tools. And what we glean from the teachings is meant for us to understand at any given level that we are given to understand it at any time. Janet, I'm really glad that you brought this up. Not everybody is ready for what it is perhaps that I know. I know that since I was a little girl, I've had the ability to see spirits. I don't remember a time in my whole life when I didn't. No matter where I go, what I am doing, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I see spirits. I can ask them to step aside, to not be so intrusive, And most of the time they will be okay with that and do as I ask. But there is never a time, even in speaking to you all this morning, it's very busy in my mind. It's very busy on my inner screen. It doesn't go away. Not everybody is ready to know that about me. Not everybody is ready to understand that about me. I'm certainly not going to sit down in a group of people that I've recently met and describe the spirits, whether they are loved ones or angels. I'm not going to do that because not everyone is ready. I hold my work so sacred that I have the discernment to know when I have to keep it secret. Sometimes we hear the phrase casting pearls before swine. Well, sometimes we want to offer what it is that we know from our own wisdom experiences in our lifetime, only to be disappointed when we offer it because people may look at us and say, I didn't ask you for that information. Or they may utilize a teaching that we've given them, and they may utilize that without good intentions. For those of us that are teachers and facilitators, we've all had that person come along. Discernment, I think, really is the key when we're talking about sacred or secret. What would you say about that, Del Marie? The other night when we were all in the Inipi, the sweat lodge, Del, you said something that I referenced yesterday in a class that I'm teaching. You made the comment, you and Barbara both did, about why it is that we keep it so dark inside the Inipi, inside the sweat lodge. And either you or Barb made mention of the fact that not everybody is ready to see spirit, or the spirits that come into the sweat lodge. We're not prepared yet to see them. And so it's just easier to be in the dark. I talked about that for a moment. Sometimes things are sacred because people aren't quite ready to see or to hear or to feel or to experience. And other times people are ready. And Spirit understands that, but to force that upon someone, Spirit is pretty good about discerning that, I believe. I don't know how all of you feel about that. I remember the year, though, that I had Sweat Lodge and there was a retired Catholic nun in the lodge. Hey, Nicole Werner. It's good to see you in the house. And happy congratulations to you on graduating from university. It's fantastic. And there have been times when Spirit has come into Sweat Lodge, or oh my goodness, I remember a time I was teaching in Muskegon, Michigan. Oh my goodness. And I was asked to speak about the subject of life after death, or what happens to us when we pass on from this physical body, at least from what I understand it to be. I am not the know-all, end-all of everything. That is for sure. I'm a human being trying to figure it all out myself. So from my experiences, I was asked to talk about this. And as I was beginning to teach the class, the room was so full. I will never forget this as long as I live. Some of the people in the room were very, very new to the subject, who had recently lost somebody, and they just wanted, a little insight into the fact that we really don't die. We just transform from one energy to another, and all of a sudden, a spirit, a discarnate spirit that every single person in the room could very clearly see. It was a woman who was wearing a very long, beautiful dress. It looked very Victorian, although I'm going to say more like the early 1900s, that sort of a look. And she walked right in front of everybody. She walked right in front of everybody and through the wall on the other side of the room disappeared. Well, it left me a little bit speechless. I mean, this is something that I see every day, but for a lot of people in the room, they had never seen anything like that. For some people, it was a wow. Did you see that? Holy smokes, I was hoping something like that was going to happen tonight. And for other people, their eyeballs got really big and their eyes began to water, and I could tell that they were afraid. And so I stopped the momentum of the conversation that happened right at that time. And I started with the basics. Life is sacred. Life is energy. We come from a sacred love and a sacred light, and to that light we return. And what you just witnessed was, right, the grace of being allowed to see exactly what I'm talking about today. This is a moment of grace. This is not a moment of horror. All of you gathered today, many of you must have asked or prayed that something would come this evening that would prove to you that life goes on. How many of you this evening prayed or asked the Creator or whatever you believe in to provide something that you would know with beyond a shadow of a doubt that life goes on? And 90% of the people in that room raised their hand. And I said, so what you just received was an answer to your prayer. Well, in that moment of using proper language, tone, right, empathy, compassion, the entire room settled down so that we could have a wonderful conversation. Some people in that moment, had I not addressed it in a way that would soothe their soul, probably would have been forever scarred emotionally or psychically by what they had seen. Which means that when we are facilitators of something, we need to be very, very mindful. Janet is saying, I saw something similar many years ago when I worked at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. I was crossing the hospital car park to the main hospital. She was crossing the parking lot. Someone was walking ahead of me and disappeared into the wall. Yes. Yeah, exactly, Amy. There are certain, she's talking about sigils and languages that are very cosmic in origin. This particular topic gets really, really deep when it comes to sacred languages, whether they are sacred geometrical patterns or sacred languages, something like the runes, etc. It's very deep. And what do you do with that? None of us escapes the results of what it is that we do in our life or what we do with the wisdom that we have gained, right? Having integrity. I was sharing with everyone yesterday about a beautiful woman who reached out to me from Southern California, whose son recently passed. Well, let me back up for just a moment. Years ago, when I first met Sister Irene Mary, I mean, most of you know of my love affair with Sister Irene Mary. I love her, I adore her, and in many ways, she saved my life and my sanity by teaching me more fully about the charismata, the gifts of the Spirit, the origins of them from the way that I was taught through Catholicism. She saved my sanity and helped me to understand that this thing that I do is a gift of the Spirit. You all have gifts too. One of my favorite conversations with Sister Irene Mary, who is a Dominican nun, she just celebrated her 50-year anniversary as a Dominican. She looked at me one evening. She and a couple of the other sisters were over. We were having tea and we were visiting, and she looked at me and she said, Denise, I want you to always remember that the work that you do is sacred. And I looked at her and I said, Sister Irene, will you describe to me your definition of sacred? And she said, I will. In her explanation to me, her definition of sacred is the soul and anything that involves the soul, working with a soul, healing a soul, praying with a soul, teaching a soul. When she said, when it involves the soul, your soul, another person's soul, the soul of another living being, to me, that is sacred. Always remember the work that you do as a seer, as a sensitive, as a teacher is sacred. It is not a sideshow. It's not a freak show. It's sacred. And that always, literally, it takes up space in my heart in a good way. In a good way. And so I do consider my work sacred. Some people do consider their work to be a sideshow, a quick money maker. And that's their path. That's not my path. Having said that, I received a note from a woman who recently lost her son within the last month. She lives in Southern Cal, and she reached out to a woman who is a psychic to be able to get some words of solace from this woman who claims to be a psychic. And this woman promptly told her that her son, who was her world, has been cursed to walk the shadow realm for the rest of his soul's existence. I read those words and I just sat there in shock. And my heart broke for that woman. That she reached out to somebody who, in a place of authority, at least in her mind, told her something so horrific about her own child who recently passed. Now, I will be speaking to her tomorrow morning. Who I'd really like to speak to is the woman who told her that, or man. I don't know if it was a man or a woman. But the damage that the words have done, your soul has been cursed to exist in the shadow realm for the entirety of its incarnation. I just sat there absolutely befuddled and angry. This is sacred work. This is holy work. The act of living and the act of dying and everything in between has the potential to be extraordinarily sacred, depending on how we look at it. Sacred is also joyful, sacred joy, sacred laughter, sacred relationship, sacred adventure, because it involves souls. To me, most everything is sacred. I like Sister Irene's definition of sacred. I've kind of taken it on as my own. If it involves the soul of any living being, seen or unseen, then it is sacred. Sacred language, sacred arcane wisdom, sacred friendship, sacred relationship, our own sacredness. It doesn't mean so holy that we don't live. It means living understanding that it is a privilege, it is an honor, it is an exquisite passion play to live. And sometimes in our living, the way that we live or what we understand in our living is not for everyone else. Maybe ever, or maybe at particular times, having discernment. There have been things that I have been taught by my teacher, Wakiam, that I will never share with another living being. He has taught me things about the realm of spirit and ceremony that I will never share with anyone else. Those remain with me. And that's okay. We all get to have that choice. If someone comes to me and wants to learn about angels, if somebody comes and wants to learn from me about whether or not God loves them, boy, that's a good one, isn't it? Oh my goodness, the number of people who come to me really the reason they want to come to me and speak to me in session is because somewhere within them they want to be sure that God loves them. Sometimes I tell somebody that God loves them, Creator loves them, Wakantanka loves them, without condition, because we are that love. And sometimes when I tell people that, they weep. I learned a long time ago that when I say Creator loves you, your Maker loves you, God loves you, Allah loves you, for some people they've never heard that, and that in and of itself is a sacred moment. Sometimes when I call somebody by their formal name, it's emotional because they've never been called Elizabeth. They've never been called by the fullness of their name. Nikki is saying, I suspect the person that told her that will receive their own smackdown. Yeah. Hey, Carla Jo. Yeah, exactly, Amy. Sandra Herrick says, sacred is tender doings. Tender doings. I love that too. Sandy's going to be here next Thursday through Sunday, as you all know. So those of you going to the mystery school at Carl and Ortroon's, I'll be picking Sandy up at the airport and heading right to Carl and Ortroon's place. So that ought to be a lot of fun. Me, Carl and Ortroon, and Sandy Herrick, and everybody at the mystery school. Yes, tender doings. And whatever we do, however we put out our energy, you're exactly right, Nikki. That wheel, that amazing sacred hoop, the wheel of fortune, karma, what goes around comes around, however you put that. It does always come right back around to help us learn to stay in our own lane in a good way. And so tomorrow, when I'm speaking with this woman, for me the hardest part is knowing that no matter what I say, the words of the person who spoke before me will have taken up space within this mother who is grieving her son. And so I will suggest to her that perhaps, she see a therapist or someone who can help her energetically to help remove those words and the damage of those words. Yes, sometimes we can find ourselves in sacred ceremonies or sacred meditation, and we have to learn for ourselves what we can handle, what we can take, what we are ready for. And if we're not ready for something, if we're not ready for a teaching, I had a woman a couple of years ago come to one of my classes, and she's a therapist, and she said to me, she's from the southern part of the state, and she said to me, I thought I was ready for what it is that you teach, but I'm not quite there yet. So please don't be offended that I'm not going to come to the next in the series. I know that I'm not ready, and I'm going to honor that. So I'm going to go back to some of the basics and build the foundation of the teachings, and then come to this class. And I respected her for that very deeply. Because if we're not ready, we need to honor that as well. And to say to ourselves, we need to dial back. Sometimes we may feel that there's peer pressure to go into a sacred study that we're not ready or prepared for, or into sacred relationship that we're not ready or prepared for. And so we need to just gently remove ourselves and go back to do whatever work it is that's required to bring us to that place of taking it up again. I hope that made sense. Yeah, sometimes people are just mean, Carla Jo. So my first thought after I read that was, so I wonder how much she tried to charge this woman to remove the curse. Anyone out there who's listening, if you meet somebody and off the cuff they say to you, oh, you know what, we've just met, but my goodness, you have been cursed, or a family member has been cursed, but for $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 I can remove that curse. Run from those people. Run really, 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 really fast from those people. They are charlatans. I'm not saying that curses don't exist. They do. That's a whole topic in and of itself, but there are opportunists out there just waiting. Exactly, Carla Jo. Yeah, she wasn't ready for that teaching. And how wonderful. You know, even in my own practice, particularly when someone that we love passes on, if there is an ability to know that they are okay on the other side, we will forego our own religious training in order to have that comfort, particularly for parents whose children have passed on, or whose four-legged children have passed on. I had a couple once that came up from the deep south of South Carolina. They were Southern Methodist, and their son had just passed. And so they made the trek all the way up to Michigan, and we sat in my session room, and I asked them if they were okay, if they were comfortable, and the husband spoke up immediately and said, "To be honest with you, I'm really scared." And I said, well, I asked the question, may I ask you why you are so scared? He said, I'm scared because you're Catholic. And I said to him, I asked the question, what is it about me being Catholic that frightens you? He said, well, you know, I'm not really sure, but I was taught that Catholics are pagans, that Catholics are not Christian, etc., etc. And so I went off on my little course of education. And I looked at him and I said, does that make you feel better about who I am? He said, it does. I said, the word Catholic means universal. It's the universal church. He said, I didn't know that. All I know is that Catholics talk to dead people that they call saints, and the Holy Mother, they call her, you know, the Holy Mother Mary, and we don't do that. All right, so we moved beyond that. And I said, well, let's begin. And I said, first of all, I'm not certain why you are here. You just told me that you wanted to come and see me. But there's a beautiful young man who's standing here with a gorgeous head of auburn red hair. And I do believe that he was a basketball player. And the mother had a great big smile come across her face. And the father began to weep. And I looked at them and said, I believe that this must be your son. And what he shows me is, my goodness, he must have been quite the basketball player, because they retired his jersey. I see his jersey going up into the rafters. And the father looked at me and said, they retired his jersey last week. We were at the ceremony when they hoisted it up into the rafters. How do you know this, Denise? How do you see this? And I said, well, I'm looking at your son like I'm looking at you. In your religion, perhaps you call them prophets of the church. In the Catholic religion, we're known as seers or sensitives. We are the modern day seers. It's a gift. God doesn't just plop us here on this earth and say, well, good luck to you. I hope to see you in 70, 80, 90 years. Spirit is always with us. I think that you know that. But understanding that he was afraid of my Catholicism, that was a sacred moment for him of being vulnerable. It also showed me how much he loved whoever it was that he was coming to communicate with or to check in on. There was such a great amount of love that he would drive all of those miles, and despite his own religious upbringing, he would be open to. And I understood, working with a soul, as Sister Irene taught me, that it was an opportunity to help all of us understand that we're more alike than we are different. And I didn't go into any deep teachings or any of that, certainly. That's not what it was about. The integrity and the discernment was. to help him overcome his fear so that he could have a moment of grace with his child. Yeah. Sacred. Tender doings. Working with souls. Playing with souls. Joyfully playing with souls. It isn't all about piety and being so serious that we forget to live. I think that it brings more joy into our lives to know that this whole experience we're having is a sacred journey. To me, that gives it more joy. It gives it more depth, more meaning. Yeah. Well, Dell is saying something. Yes, absolutely, Chue. We had what I call a teaching inipi this weekend. Had people that never experienced being in an inipi. Maybe something they weren't ready, but was willing to experience. Yes, we explained the symbology of using the inipi. I hope they realize it is something they can utilize to enhance their lives. Exactly, there were people inside the lodge this weekend who had never experienced a lodge, a sweat lodge, inipi, purification ceremony. Never been one in their life. Some of them, showed up not really fully understanding what was going to happen. So rather than make it a sweat lodge as I might normally do it or pour it, well, I had two of my sisters in there who could help them understand. So it was very gentle. It was very teaching. Carla Jo, you were there. You participated in that. An opportunity, as Amy is saying, to dip their toe in. And I think for me, one of the most precious moments was a woman who was here from south of Texas who came to the sweat. And in the end, she was explaining to me that during the lodge, two of her great aunts came to visit her. She said, I saw them. They stood right in front of me. They were very religious women. And they came to me inside that sweat lodge, and it was beautiful. Our exchange was beautiful. Some people have experiences that they can't put words to. They cried, there are tears, but there are no words. And that's okay too, because sometimes sacred is something that we cannot describe in words. It's something that we can describe maybe in our tears or sacred laughter, but we can't put words to it. And so we allow in sacred moment for someone to be with sacred, even when that sacred is represented by a nonstop flow of tears. We had that too, just gentle tears. And the expression of Denise, I'll never be the same after this experience. I feel so blessed. I will never be the same. To whatever degree that she experienced the sacred within her soul, that particular person. I don't take that lightly, in that I understand that whether I'm teaching or pouring lodge or I'm in with my sisters and they're offering teachings, and Barbara sang a special song inside the inipi, and Damarie was helping, to comfort some people that were a little bit nervous because it gets hot in there real quick. To our doorkeepers, we had two amazing doorkeepers that evening who understood maybe they just weren't ready to be inside the inipi, but they felt really good about being of service outside the inipi, keeping the door. So that during the intercessions between the doors, when we say open the door, they could open the door. Let some cool air in. Nicole is saying, that was me. I sobbed the whole time I was in with you last year in Pine Ridge. I couldn't tell you why I was crying, but like you said, it was life-changing. Exactly. Sometimes sacred moves us in a place within our heart, within our soul, that the only way it can move through us is with silent tears. There are no words, there are no songs, there are no sounds. Somebody asked me recently, or made the statement, geez, Denise, I bet in these last few months when you've been meeting your biological family, I bet there have been a lot of tears. I said, there have. There have been tears of absolute joy, tears of recognition, tears of, oh my God, finally, tears of being absolutely moved by the generosity of my family. Yesterday I was sitting in the Social Security office, which a lot of people consider just to be something they really don't want to do. But I happened to run into a young lady that comes to many of my classes, and she and I sat and we visited and had a wonderful conversation. And she's from Germany, and we were just talking, and she said, so Denise, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm changing my name. She said, well, I saw something about that on Facebook. She said, I love all of the photos with you and your relatives. They're wonderful. She is the one who said, I bet there have been a lot of tears. Karina, she said, I bet there have been I said, there have. And she said, so what has it been like for you? Has anyone rejected you? And I said, well, anyone potentially who might reject me has bothered not to come, to not show up, to not be present. And everyone else who has been present at those reunions has been absolutely spectacular. Spectacular. This is a very sacred time in my life. So move forward to, I was number A71. So they called me A71. Some people had been there for like 3 hours. I think I was there for like 45 minutes. And so I went up to the counter, and it was a very nice young man. And he said, so you're changing your name. This is quite a name change. I said, it is. You want to know why? He said, well, sure. So I told him. He said, so what you're saying to me, today is a really big deal for you, getting your Social Security card changed. It's a big deal. I said, it is a big deal. Thank you for being part of it. And he looked at me. I said, you probably don't think of yourself maybe in this way, but you're part of people's journey, and today you're a part of my journey. And I want to thank you for that. And he looked at me and he started to kind of giggle, and he said, I don't think of myself like that. And thank you. I'm happy to be part of your journey. I said, this life is a doozy, isn't it? He said, oh, it can be a real doozy, but you just made my day. Something as mundane as getting a Social Security card changed with a new name became a sacred moment, a joyfully sacred moment. A joyfully sacred moment. Sometimes we have painfully sacred moments. Karina said to me, so you finally got to meet your mom and dad? And I said, well, no, not actually, because both of them have passed. She said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, it's okay. It's the journey that we decided to take in this lifetime. A moment of painful grace. But grace nonetheless. It's sacred. It's sacred. I think that understanding that even a trip to the Social Security office or the Department of Motor Vehicles is an opportunity to bring grace or sacred with us, because we do that if we choose to do that. Somebody once said to me, how come it is that you go to these places and you have a really good experience? Well, I expect to have a good experience, and on my side of the counter, I bring with me a good experience. I don't take changing my name lightly, and I love the backstory to why I'm changing my name, or bringing it back around. It is sacred, but I don't hold it secret. Some things we keep to ourselves. If we consider that life is sacred, because we are always dealing with souls, seen and unseen, then we live our lives differently. We may say that we're walking the red road, or we're walking the teaching of Mitakuye-Oyasin, we are all related. That's also sacred, realizing the sacred. All the little critters in my backyard, Some consider them a nuisance. I look at them as little beings that are just trying to have their way in the world. I've got one actually right now in the downstairs mechanical room because Dominic decided to bring a chipmunk friend into the house yesterday. So I'm feeding him in the back corner until I can catch him in a good way and release him. So for me, setting a trap to kill him is not an option. I don't do that. You all know me. So I have this little sacred being skittering around in the back part of the mechanical room downstairs. How do you look at it? How do you view things? How do you view yourself? Hopefully as sacred. You are a sacred being. The relationship that we have even here on these Wednesday mornings, I consider that sacred. That's why I call it Exploring Sacred. We're doing it together. Whether we're in the United Kingdom, like our good friend Janet is right now at this time in the afternoon for her, or the rest of us all over the United States, taking a moment of sacred and to ponder sacred. And what a blessing that is. Discernment, integrity, being wholly human. Right? Sometimes, boy, we think to ourselves, where did my integrity go in that moment? I wasn't being very sacred right then, was I? Well, sometimes in the recognition of when we've kind of fallen off the red road and into the black and blue road, or as I call it, into the pucker brush, right? Gives us an opportunity to remind ourselves, oh, that's right, I'm human. I better get back on the red road. Time to get back off my pity pot or out of these picker bushes and back onto the red road with myself as well. With that, everybody, thank you for joining me this morning. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for walking this human life with me. Thank you for holding sacred what is sacred. Thank you for seeing the sacred in all things, including yourself. With that, everybody, please get out there and shine your light as only you can shine it. Blessings be.